The security guard's voice cut through the elegant lobby of the Chicago Symphony Hall like a blade. "Ma'am, I'm gonna need you to step aside. These seats are for premium ticket holders only." His eyes swept over my simple black dress, my worn leather purse, and the scuffed flats I'd polished that morning until they gleamed as best they could. The judgment in his gaze was unmistakable. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." I stood there, clutching the ticket my parents had given me, feeling the eyes of elegantly dressed patrons boring into my back as they whispered among themselves. The golden ticket in my trembling hand felt like fool's gold, a cruel joke wrapped in expensive cardstock. But I had no idea yet just how deep this humiliation would cut, or how spectacularly it would all unravel in the next 2 hours. My name is Sarah Williams, and until 3 months ago, I thought I understood my place in my family's carefully constructed hierarchy. I was 34 years old, a high school history teacher in suburban Milwaukee, living paycheck to paycheck in a one-bedroom apartment with a broken air conditioner and dreams that felt increasingly out of reach. I had spent the last 16 years believing that my parents, Dr. Richard and Patricia Hartwell, simply favored my younger brother Marcus, because he was the successful one, the lawyer, the golden child who had never disappointed them. I was wrong about so many things. The evening had started with such promise. It was my father's 70th birthday, and for the first time in years, he had invited me to join the family celebration. Not just any celebration, but an evening at the Chicago Symphony Hall to hear Yo-Yo Ma perform with the orchestra. These weren't just any tickets either. They were premium seats, front row center, the kind that cost more than I made in a month. When the elegant invitation arrived at my apartment 2 weeks prior, I had stared at it in disbelief. I had driven the 4 hours from Milwaukee to Chicago in my aging Honda Civic, the engine making concerning noises that I couldn't afford to fix. I had spent my last $100 on the black dress I was wearing, something appropriate for such a prestigious venue. I had practiced conversations in my head during the entire drive, imagining how proud my parents might finally be to have me there, dressed appropriately, ready to be part of their sophisticated world. The reunion at the hotel had been stilted but civil. My father, tall and distinguished with his silver hair and expensive suit, had greeted me with a brief hug. My mother, elegant as always in her designer gown and pearls, had made polite conversation about my teaching job while clearly wishing she could discuss anything, more impressive. Marcus had arrived in his BMW, talking loudly about his latest case, his wife Jennifer trailing behind him in a dress that cost more than my monthly rent. We had taken separate cars to the Symphony Hall, and that should have been my first warning. As we approached the magnificent building with its soaring columns and golden lights, I felt a flutter of anticipation. This was it, I thought. This was my moment to finally belong, to finally be part of something beautiful and meaningful with my family. The usher who first greeted us was an elderly gentleman with kind eyes and a genuine smile. He had examined everyone's tickets with care, directing Marcus and Jennifer toward the premium entrance with warm enthusiasm. When he reached for mine, something strange happened. His expression shifted, just slightly, and he spent longer looking at the ticket than he had with the others. He glanced up at me, then back at the ticket, then at me again. "This way, miss," he said quietly, but instead of pointing toward the premium entrance where my family was headed, he gestured toward a side corridor. "There's been a small issue with seating arrangements. If you could just wait here for a moment while I sort this out." My stomach dropped. My family continued toward their entrance without looking back, swept up in their excitement about the evening ahead. I stood alone in the marble corridor, watching other patrons in their finery glide past me toward the main seating area. The kind usher disappeared, and in his place came the security guard, a younger man with hard eyes and no patience for what he clearly saw as a problem to be solved quickly and quietly. The rest happened in a blur of humiliation that seemed to unfold in slow motion. The security guard had examined my ticket with suspicion, making calls on his radio, speaking in hushed tones to other staff members who gathered to stare at me. Other patrons slowed their elegant procession to gawk at the spectacle. I caught fragments of whispered conversations, words like mistake and doesn't belong, and how embarrassing. I tried to explain that I was with my family, that my father was Dr. Richard Hartwell, that there must be some misunderstanding. But my voice sounded small and desperate in the vast space, and with each passing moment, I felt myself shrinking further into insignificance. The security guard remained unmoved, professional but firm in his conviction that I was trying to access seats that were beyond my station. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to ask you to move to the general seating area," he said, his voice carrying just enough volume that nearby patrons could hear every word. "Your ticket appears to have been incorrectly issued. We'll get you sorted with something more appropriate." The word appropriate hit me like a physical blow. I looked down at my carefully chosen dress, at my polished shoes, at the ticket that bore the same elegant printing as the ones my family had carried so confidently into the premium section. Nothing about this felt right, but I had no power, no voice, no way to fight back against the crushing weight of their certainty that I didn't belong. That's when I saw my mother. She was standing near the premium entrance, partially hidden behind a marble column, watching the entire scene unfold. Our eyes met across the crowded lobby, and in that moment, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't surprise or concern or confusion at seeing her daughter being humiliated in public. It was resignation. It was the look of someone watching a plan unfold exactly as intended. She turned away without a word and disappeared into the premium seating area, leaving me standing there with the horrible realization that this wasn't a mistake at all. This was deliberate, this was orchestrated. And somehow, my own mother was part of it. The security guard was still talking, explaining procedures and alternatives, but his words faded into background noise. A strange calm settled over me, the kind that comes when shock is so complete that it numbs everything else. I nodded politely, took the general admission replacement ticket he offered, and made my way to the cheaper seats in the upper balcony. I spent the first half of Yo-Yo Ma's performance in a daze, the beautiful music washing over me while my mind reeled with questions. Why would my parents do this? What was the point of inviting me only to humiliate me? And why did that first usher look at my ticket with such strange recognition before everything went wrong? During intermission, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of staying in my assigned seat like a good, obedient daughter, I decided to find answers. I made my way back down to the main lobby, weaving through the crowd of patrons sipping champagne and discussing the performance. I was looking for that first usher, the kind man who had looked at my ticket with such puzzling interest. I found him near the coat check, quietly organizing programs for some late arrivals. When he saw me approaching, his face lit up with what looked like relief. "Miss," he said quietly, "I was hoping I might see you again. There's something about your ticket that I think you should know. Something that changes everything." The way he said it, with such gravity and certainty, made my heart race. I followed him to a quiet corner of the lobby, away from the crowd and the noise. He pulled out a small notebook and flipped through several pages before stopping at one covered with his careful handwriting. "Your ticket," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just any premium seat. It's a very special reservation, one that was made years ago for a very specific person. The system flagged it the moment I scanned it, but I wanted to be absolutely certain before I said anything." He looked at me with eyes full of something I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Respect. "Miss, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible, but I've been working at this hall for 37 years. I've seen a lot of things, but I've never seen a reservation quite like this one. Your ticket isn't just for premium seating. It's for seat A1, front row center, and it was reserved under a very specific military designation." My breath caught in my throat. Military designation. The word hung in the air between us like a bridge to a truth I couldn't yet see. "The reservation," he continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction, "was made for Colonel S. Williams, active duty. And according to our records, that reservation has been automatically renewed every year for the past 15 years, waiting for Colonel Williams to claim it." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process what he was saying. Colonel S. Williams. My maiden name was Williams. My first name was Sarah. But I had never served in the military, had never held any rank, had never done anything that would warrant such an honor. There must be some mistake, I whispered, but even as I said it, something deep in my chest was stirring, a recognition that felt like remembering something I had been forced to forget. The usher shook his head gently. No mistake, miss. The reservation comes with a notation that the colonel's seating is to be honored regardless of what the printed ticket shows. It's a lifetime honor, reserved for those who have served with particular distinction. He paused, studying my face with increasing certainty. Miss, I believe someone has been deliberately keeping you from claiming what is rightfully yours, and if you'll permit me, I'd like to escort you to your proper seat. It's time Colonel Williams took her place where she belongs. The walk to the premium seating area felt like moving through a dream. The elderly usher, who had introduced himself as Mr. Peterson, guided me through corridors I hadn't known existed, past velvet ropes and marble statues that seemed to watch our procession with silent approval. My hands were trembling, and I kept touching the ticket in my purse as if it might vanish and prove this was all an elaborate hallucination. Mr. Peterson, I managed to say as we approached a set of ornate doors. I think there's been a terrible mistake. I'm just a high school teacher from Milwaukee. I've never served in the military. I don't understand any of this. He paused, his weathered hand resting on the brass door handle, and turned to face me with an expression of profound sadness mixed with determination. Miss Williams, in my 37 years here, I've learned that the people who deserve honor the most are often the ones who've been convinced they don't deserve it at all. The doors opened to reveal the premium section in all its glory. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over rows of plush burgundy seats, each one positioned for perfect acoustics and sightlines. The stage seemed close enough to touch, and I could see the musicians preparing for the second half of the performance. But what caught my attention wasn't the opulence of the space. It was my family. They were seated in the third row, close enough to the stage to be considered excellent seats, but not the front row. Not the seats that Mr. Peterson was leading me toward. My father was leaning over to whisper something to Marcus, and they both laughed quietly. My mother was studying her program with the intense focus she reserved for things that made her feel sophisticated. None of them looked toward the entrance. None of them seemed concerned about where I might be. Front row center, Mr. Peterson announced quietly, gesturing toward a single seat directly in the middle of the first row. It was flanked by two empty seats, creating a small island of space that somehow felt both isolated and commanding. Above the seat, mounted discreetly on the wall, was a small brass plaque that I hadn't noticed from a distance. I leaned closer to read it, and my world tilted on its axis. In honor of Colonel Sarah E. Williams, United States Army, Combat Medic, Purple Heart, Bronze Star. Your service will never be forgotten. The words swam before my eyes. Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Combat Medic. These weren't just military decorations. These were honors given to people who had risked everything, who had saved lives under fire, who had served their country with extraordinary courage. And according to this plaque, that person was me, but I had no memory of any of it. I sank into the seat, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Mr. Peterson sat in the empty chair beside me, his face etched with concern. Miss Williams, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. I don't remember, I whispered, staring at the plaque. I don't remember any military service. I don't remember being a medic. I don't remember earning these medals. How is that possible? Mr. Peterson was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. Sometimes people forget things that are too painful to remember. Sometimes they're helped to forget by people who think it's for the best. But the records don't lie, and neither does the United States Army. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. When your ticket triggered the military reservation system, I took the liberty of making some calls. I hope you don't mind, but I have a son who works at the Veterans Administration. He was able to pull some basic information. My hands shook as I unfolded the paper. It was a printout of military service records, official and undeniable. Staff Sergeant Sarah Elizabeth Williams, later promoted to colonel. Deployed to Afghanistan, 2009 to 2012. Multiple commendations for valor. Medical discharge following injuries sustained in an IED explosion while treating wounded soldiers under enemy fire. The paper fluttered in my trembling hands. 2009 to 2012. I would have been 21 to 24 years old. But according to my memories, those were the years I spent at the state university. Studying education, living in a cramped dorm room, struggling through student teaching placements. This is impossible, I breathed. I was in college then. I remember college. I remember my professors, my roommates, graduation. I have photos. Mr. Peterson's expression grew even more grave. Colonel Williams, I don't know what happened to you or why your memories were altered, but I do know this. The United States military doesn't make mistakes about things like this. These records are real. Your service was real. Your sacrifices were real. The lights dimmed as the second half of the performance began, but I barely noticed. My mind was racing, trying to reconcile the impossible contradictions between what I remembered and what these documents claimed. How could I have lived two completely different lives during the same years? How could I have forgotten something as monumental as military service, combat, medals for heroism? As Yo-Yo Ma's cello filled the concert hall with haunting melodies, fragments of images began flashing through my mind. Desert landscapes, the weight of a medical kit on my shoulders, the sound of helicopters, blood on my hands as I worked to save someone's life. The images were hazy, like looking through thick glass, but they felt real in a way that made my chest tighten with an emotion I couldn't name. During a particularly quiet passage in the music, I heard my mother's voice carry from 3 rows behind me. She was whispering to my father, but in the acoustically perfect space, her words reached me with crystal clarity. Richard, are you absolutely certain she doesn't remember? After all these years, you're sure the treatment held? My father's response was equally clear. The doctors assured us it was permanent. The trauma was so severe, and with the therapy we arranged, there was no way she could recover those memories. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She believes she went to college like a normal girl. She has no idea about Afghanistan, about what she did there, about why she came back so broken. And the medals? The military kept sending correspondence to the house for years, all handled through our lawyers. As her next of kin during her medical treatment, we had the authority to manage her affairs. We redirected everything to a post office box. She never saw any of it. My blood turned to ice in my veins. The music continued, but all I could hear was the thundering of my own heartbeat. They knew. They had always known. Not only had they known about my military service, they had actively participated in erasing it from my memory. I turned slightly in my seat and saw them clearly for the first time in years. My father, the respected psychiatrist, who specialized in trauma treatment and memory therapy. My mother, who had always been so insistent that I focus on normal things, on teaching, on settling down with a nice civilian man, both of them watching the performance with serene expressions, as if they hadn't just casually discussed the systematic destruction of their daughter's identity. The pieces began falling into place with horrifying clarity. My college years that felt strangely hazy in my memory, the gaps in my recollection that I had always attributed to stress or poor memory. The way my parents had always changed the subject. When I mentioned wanting to travel, to do something meaningful with my life, to make a difference, they hadn't just discouraged my ambitions. They had surgically removed the proof that I had already achieved more than they could ever imagine. As the final notes of the performance echoed through the hall, I made a decision that felt like waking up from a decade-long coma. I was going to find out exactly what they had taken from me, and I was going to take it back. The applause was thunderous, but I barely heard it. I was focused entirely on the conversation I was about to have with my family, armed with knowledge they thought I would never possess. As the audience began filing out, chattering excitedly about the magnificent performance, I remained in my seat, waiting. Mr. Peterson had stayed beside me throughout the entire second half, and now he leaned over with concern. Colonel Williams, what can I do to help? I looked at him, this kind stranger who had given me back a piece of myself that I didn't even know was missing, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt the stirring of something I had thought was lost forever. It was courage. The kind of courage that earns bronze stars and purple hearts. The kind of courage that saves lives under enemy fire. The kind of courage that my family had tried so desperately to bury. "Mr. Peterson," I said, my voice steady and clear, "I need you to help me understand exactly what was done to me. And then I need to figure out how to undo it." He nodded with the solemn respect of one veteran acknowledging another. "It would be my honor, Colonel." As my family began gathering their things 3 rows behind us, completely unaware that their carefully constructed deception was about to collapse around them, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt like myself, not the diminished, apologetic version they had created, but the person I had been before they convinced me I was someone else entirely. The person who had saved lives in a war zone was about to fight the most important battle of her life, and this time, she wouldn't be fighting alone. The lobby was emptying as patrons filtered out into the Chicago night, their conversations a blend of musical appreciation and social pleasantries. I stood near the marble columns, watching my family emerge from the premium seating area with the casual confidence of people who believed their secrets were safe. Marcus was discussing the technical aspects of the performance with Jennifer, while my parents moved with the practiced grace of those accustomed to high society events. They hadn't noticed me yet. In their world, I was safely tucked away in the upper balcony, properly contained in a seat that matched their assessment of my worth. The irony wasn't lost on me, that they had spent so much effort to diminish me, while simultaneously erasing evidence of achievements that would have made them the envy of every parent in their social circle. Mr. Peterson appeared at my elbow, carrying a manila folder that hadn't been there before. "Colonel Williams, I took the liberty of making a few more calls during the performance. My contacts in the veterans community were very interested to learn that a decorated war hero had been located." I accepted the folder with hands that were steadier than they had been all evening. Inside were photocopied documents that painted a picture of a life I should have remembered but didn't. Commendation letters from commanding officers praising my quick thinking under fire. Medical reports detailing the injuries I sustained while dragging 2 wounded soldiers to safety during an ambush. A letter from the Secretary of Defense personally thanking me for my service and sacrifice. At the bottom of the stack was a photograph that made my breath catch. It showed a young woman in military fatigues, her face dirty and exhausted, but her eyes blazing with determination. She was kneeling beside a makeshift medical station in what appeared to be a desert outpost, her hands working to treat a wounded soldier. The woman looked exactly like me, but stronger, more confident, more alive than I had ever felt in my supposed civilian life. "The photographer who took this picture remembered you," Mr. Peterson said quietly. "He said you saved 17 lives that day during a coordinated attack on your forward operating base. You kept working even after shrapnel tore through your shoulder. The Bronze Star citation specifically mentions your refusal to seek medical attention until every wounded soldier had been stabilized." I stared at the photograph, and suddenly the fragments of memory that had been flickering all evening began to coalesce into something clearer. I could almost hear the sound of incoming mortars, could almost feel the weight of responsibility that came with being the person others turned to when everything went wrong. For a moment, the sensation was so vivid that I reached instinctively for medical supplies that weren't there. "Sarah?" My mother's voice cut through the memory like a blade. She was standing 10 feet away, her face a mask of carefully controlled panic. "What are you doing down here? I thought you were seated upstairs." My father and Marcus had noticed the commotion and were approaching, their expressions shifting from mild curiosity to alarm as they took in the scene. The folder in my hands, Mr. Peterson's respectful posture, the brass plaque visible on the wall behind us that proclaimed my military service. "Hello, Mother," I said, my voice carrying a steadiness that surprised even me. I was just learning some interesting things about my past, things that apparently slipped your mind over the years. "Doctor?" Richard Hartwell stepped forward, his psychiatrist's training evident in the way he immediately began assessing the situation for threats to his carefully constructed narrative. "Sarah, sweetheart, I think there's been some confusion. Why don't we discuss this at home where we can sort everything out privately?" Privately, I repeated, tasting the word like something bitter. The way we've discussed everything privately for the past 15 years? The way you privately arranged for me to forget that I served 3 tours in Afghanistan? The way you privately intercepted all correspondence from the military about my decorations and benefits? The color drained from my mother's face. Marcus looked genuinely confused, glancing between his parents and me as if trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Jennifer had the wide-eyed expression of someone who had stumbled into a family drama far more complex than expected. My father's composure cracked slightly. Sarah, you were severely traumatized. The doctors said your memories of the war were causing you psychological distress that could have been permanent. We did what we thought was best for your recovery. What you thought was best, I said, stepping closer, was to convince me that I was ordinary, that I had never done anything meaningful with my life, that I should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention you threw my way because I had never earned anything better. I opened the folder and pulled out the Bronze Star citation, holding it up so they could all see the official seal and formal language that described heroism under fire. Does this look ordinary to you? Does saving 17 lives in a single day sound like the accomplishment of someone who doesn't deserve a front row seat at a concert? Mr. Peterson cleared his throat respectfully. If I may interrupt, the reservation system shows that these seats have been held in Colonel Williams' honor for 15 years. The Chicago Symphony has been trying to reach her to present a special recognition for her service, but all correspondence was returned as undeliverable. My mother made a small, strangled sound. My father's jaw tightened in the way it always did when his authority was challenged. But it was Marcus who spoke first, his voice filled with genuine shock. Sarah, is this real? Were you really in the army? Were you really a colonel? I looked at my younger brother, the golden child who had been raised to believe he was the only one in our family worth celebrating, and felt a surge of sympathy for him. He had been as much a victim of our parents' manipulation as I had been, just in a different way. According to the United States military, yes. According to the doctors who treated my injuries, yes. According to the soldiers whose lives I saved, yes. According to everyone except the 2 people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally. A small crowd had begun to gather around us. Other patrons who had been leaving slowed their pace, drawn by the intensity of the confrontation. I saw several people pointing at the brass plaque, reading it with expressions of dawning respect and outrage. Excuse me, a distinguished gentleman in a tuxedo approached our group. I couldn't help but overhear. Are you Colonel Sarah Williams, the medic who served in Afghanistan? I nodded, still not quite believing it myself. The man's face lit up with recognition and something approaching reverence. Colonel, I'm General Robert Hayes, retired. I served with the 3rd Infantry Division. Your reputation preceded you even to our sector. Every medic in the theater knew your name. You were a legend among the medical corps. The word legend hung in the air like a challenge to everything my parents had spent 15 years trying to make me believe about myself. More people were gathering now, and I caught fragments of whispered conversations. Veterans recognizing the decorations listed on the citation. Civilians expressing outrage that a war hero had been treated with such disrespect. My father made one last desperate attempt to control the narrative. This is a private family matter. Sarah has been through significant trauma, and these documents may not be entirely accurate. General Hayes turned to him with the kind of cold stare that had probably terrified subordinates for decades. Sir, are you suggesting that the United States Army made an error in awarding the Bronze Star and Purple Heart? Are you questioning the integrity of military records? I'm a doctor, my father said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used when he expected to be obeyed without question. I know what's best for my daughter's mental health. With all due respect, Doctor, Mr. Peterson interjected, your daughter is a decorated war hero who saved dozens of lives. The only question about mental health here is why anyone would try to make her forget that. The crowd around us had grown larger, and I could see people taking out their phones, recording what was rapidly becoming a public spectacle. My parents, who had always been so concerned with their social standing and reputation, were watching their carefully crafted image crumble in real time. But I wasn't focused on them anymore. I was looking at the faces of the strangers who had gathered around us, seeing respect and admiration in their eyes. For the first time in 15 years, I was being seen for who I really was, not who my parents had convinced me I should be. "Colonel Williams," General Hayes said formally, "it would be my honor to escort you to your reserved seat. The symphony has a tradition of recognizing military service, and I believe an announcement is in order." I looked back at my family one last time. My parents stood frozen in their humiliation, finally confronted with the consequences of their deception. Marcus was staring at me with something that looked like awe, as if he was seeing his sister for the first time. Jennifer was quietly crying, perhaps understanding better than anyone what it meant to have your identity stolen by the people who claimed to love you. "Thank you, General," I said, accepting his offered arm. "I think it's time I took my proper place." As we walked toward the premium seating area, followed by a growing procession of supporters and witnesses, I heard the symphony director's voice over the sound system, announcing a special recognition for a distinguished veteran in attendance. The applause that followed was thunderous, washing over me like a tide of validation that I had been denied for too long. I sat down in the front row center seat that had been waiting for me all these years, surrounded by people who understood that some honors cannot be erased, no matter how hard others try to bury them. For the first time since I could remember, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The standing ovation continued for several minutes, and through it all I kept my eyes forward, looking toward a future where I would never again allow anyone to convince me I was less than I truly was. Colonel Sarah Williams had finally come home. The applause finally died down, and the Symphony Hall returned to its elegant quiet, but the energy in the room had fundamentally shifted. I remained in my seat as the crowd slowly dispersed, many people stopping to shake my hand or simply nod with respect as they passed. General Hayes had taken the seat beside me, and we sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, both of us absorbing the magnitude of what had just occurred. "Colonel," he said eventually, his voice thoughtful, "I've seen a lot of injustices in my time, but what was done to you ranks among the worst. To steal someone's service record, their identity, their very sense of self, that's a special kind of cruelty." I nodded, still processing the revelation that my entire adult life had been built on a foundation of lies. "General, can I ask you something?" "The memories. They're starting to come back, but they're fragmented. Is it possible that 15 years of therapy and medication could have suppressed them so completely?" His expression darkened. "More possible than it should be. There have been cases of families using medical authority to essentially rewrite a veteran's history, especially when PTSD is involved. It's rare, but it happens. Usually when the family can't handle the reality of what their loved one experienced, or when they decide that civilian life is, quote, safer than acknowledging military service." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. "I'm going to put you in touch with some people who can help you recover what was taken. There are specialists who work specifically with veterans whose medical records have been tampered with. More importantly, there are lawyers who handle cases of medical fraud and family manipulation." The word fraud sent a chill through me. "You think what they did was criminal?" "Colonel, if what I witnessed tonight is accurate, if your parents used their medical credentials to suppress your memories, intercept your military correspondence, and steal your benefits, then yes, I think several crimes were committed. Identity theft, mail fraud, medical malpractice, and possibly veteran benefit fraud." As if summoned by our conversation, my father appeared at the end of our row. The confident psychiatrist from earlier was gone, replaced by a man who looked every one of his 70 years. His face was gray, his expensive suit somehow looking shabby under the weight of public exposure. "Sarah," he said quietly, "we need to talk." General Hayes started to rise, but I placed a gentle hand on his arm. "It's all right, General. I think it's time we had this conversation." My father approached slowly, as if walking through a minefield. "Sarah, sweetheart, I know how this must look, but you have to understand. You came back from Afghanistan broken. You were having nightmares, flashbacks, panic attacks. The doctors said your military memories were so traumatized that they were preventing you from living a normal life. A normal life, I repeated, and for the first time, I felt genuine anger beginning to replace the shock and confusion. You mean a life where I believed I was ordinary, where I accepted being treated as lesser than Marcus, where I never questioned why I felt like something fundamental was missing from my identity. You were sick, Sarah. The PTSD was severe. We found specialists who could help you move past the trauma by creating new, healthier memories. You were happy as a teacher. You had a peaceful life. General Hayes made a sound of disgust. Doctor, with all due respect, you don't cure PTSD by erasing the experiences that caused it. You treat it by helping the veteran integrate those experiences into their life, in a healthy way. What you did wasn't treatment, it was amputation. My father's professional facade cracked completely. You don't understand. She came home covered in scars, talking about friends who died in her arms, describing combat scenarios that gave us nightmares just to hear. We couldn't stand seeing her suffer like that. So you decided I shouldn't suffer at all, I said, the pieces clicking together with devastating clarity. You decided that my pain was too inconvenient for your comfortable lives. You couldn't handle having a daughter who had seen combat, who had been changed by war, who might need actual support instead of just erasure. My mother appeared behind my father, her elegant composure completely shattered. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her makeup smeared, her designer gown wrinkled from the stress of the evening. Sarah, please, we thought we were giving you a fresh start. A chance to be normal. Normal. I stood up, and for the first time in 15 years, I felt the full weight of my own presence. Mother, I was never meant to be normal. I was meant to be extraordinary. I was meant to save lives, to serve my country, to earn the respect of my peers, through courage and skill. You took that away from me, because you couldn't handle being the parents of a war hero. The conversation was drawing attention from the remaining staff members, who were cleaning up from the evening's performance. Mr. Peterson had returned with another folder, this one significantly thicker than the first. Colonel Williams, he said, I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of reaching out to some additional contacts. It seems your case has garnered quite a bit of interest in the veteran community. He opened the folder to reveal newspaper clippings, printed emails, and official documents. These are articles about your service that were published in various military publications. Letters from soldiers you saved, thanking you for your heroism. And this, he pulled out an official-looking document, is a notice from the Department of Veterans Affairs, indicating that your disability benefits have been unclaimed for 15 years because all correspondence was being returned to sender. The room seemed to tilt as the full scope of what had been stolen from me became clear. Not just my memories, not just my identity, but actual financial benefits that I had earned through my service and sacrifice. Money that could have changed my entire life, that could have lifted me out of the paycheck-to-paycheck existence I had accepted as my lot. How much? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mr. Peterson consulted the document. According to this, your monthly disability payment for service-connected injuries should have been approximately $2,000 per month, with 15 years of back payments plus interest. He did some quick calculations. You're looking at well over $400,000 in unclaimed benefits. My father went white. My mother actually swayed on her feet, reaching for a nearby chair for support. $400,000. Money that could have given me independence, dignity, choices. Money that had been accumulating in government accounts while I struggled to afford basic necessities on a teacher's salary. That's not all, General Hayes added grimly. Colonel, if your parents have been intercepting government correspondence and preventing you from accessing your benefits, that's federal fraud. The penalties for that are severe. Marcus appeared at the edge of our group, his face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. Sarah, I had no idea. I swear to you, I never knew about any of this. They told me you had gone to college, that you were happy teaching. I never questioned why you seemed so distant from the family. I looked at my younger brother, the golden child who had unknowingly been used as a weapon against me, and felt a complex mix of sympathy and sadness. Marcus, they convinced both of us of lies. They made you believe you were the only child worth celebrating, and they made me believe I had nothing to celebrate. The implications were staggering. Not just the money, though that was significant. Not just the recognition, though that mattered enormously. But the fundamental theft of identity. The systematic dismantling of everything I had earned and achieved. The deliberate cultivation of shame where there should have been pride. Dr. Hartwell, General Hayes said formally, I strongly suggest you contact a lawyer. Federal investigators tend to take veteran benefit fraud very seriously, especially when it involves family members in positions of medical authority. My father seemed to age another decade in that moment. The respected psychiatrist, the pillar of the community, faced with the reality that his asking of his daughter might result in federal criminal charges. Sarah, he said desperately, we can fix this. We can help you recover your memories properly, claim your benefits, get the recognition you deserve. It doesn't have to be adversarial. I studied his face, looking for any sign of genuine remorse or understanding. What I saw instead was calculation. The mind of a man trying to minimize damage rather than accept responsibility. You're right, I said finally. It doesn't have to be adversarial. All you had to do was tell me the truth 15 years ago. All you had to do was help me heal from my trauma, instead of pretending it never existed. All you had to do was love me for who I actually was instead of who you wanted me to be. I turned to General Hayes and Mr. Peterson. Gentlemen, I believe I have some phone calls to make. And I think it's time Colonel Sarah Williams reclaimed everything that was taken from her. As we walked toward the exit, leaving my parents standing in the wreckage of their deception, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 15 years. I felt like myself. Not the diminished version they had created, but the woman who had earned respect through courage, who had saved lives under fire, who had served her country with honor. The war hero had finally come home, and she was ready to fight for everything she had lost. 6 months later, I stood in the office of Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the specialist in recovered military trauma who had been working with me to restore my suppressed memories. The walls were lined with certificates and commendations, but what caught my attention were the photographs of other veterans she had helped, their faces showing the same mixture of pain and hope that I recognized in my own mirror. Colonel Williams, Dr. Martinez said, closing the thick file that contained months of our work together, I have to say, your progress has been remarkable. The memories that were artificially suppressed are not only returning, they're integrating in a surprisingly healthy way. I nodded, thinking about the journey of the past 6 months. It hadn't been easy. The memories that came flooding back were often painful, filled with images of combat, loss, and the weight of responsibility that came with being a medic in a war zone. But they were mine. They belonged to me, and reclaiming them had been like finding pieces of my soul that I didn't even know were missing. The nightmares? She asked, though she already knew the answer from our sessions. Still there sometimes, I admitted, but different now. Before, when I had them, they felt foreign, like someone else's dreams invading my sleep. Now they feel like memories, and memories can be processed, understood, integrated. The PTSD is manageable when you acknowledge what caused it instead of pretending it never happened. The legal proceedings had moved with surprising speed once federal investigators became involved. The FBI's white-collar crime unit had taken a particular interest in the case, especially when they discovered the extent of the mail fraud and benefit theft. My parents' manipulation hadn't just been emotional abuse. It had been a systematic criminal enterprise that had cost the government hundreds of thousands of dollars in misdirected benefits and administrative costs. The final settlement had been staggering: $467,000 in back benefits, plus interest and penalties. But more than the money, it was the official recognition that mattered. The Department of Veterans Affairs had issued a formal apology for the failure of their systems to prevent such fraud. The Secretary of Veterans Affairs himself had called to personally apologize and ensure that my case would be used to strengthen protections for other veterans. My father's medical license had been suspended pending a full investigation by the state medical board. The charges of medical malpractice, elder abuse, and fraud were serious enough that his legal team was already discussing plea bargains. My mother faced her own charges related to mail fraud and conspiracy. Their prestigious social standing had evaporated overnight, replaced by the humiliation of being publicly exposed as people who had stolen from their own daughter and defrauded the federal government. Marcus had surprised me the most during this process. The revelation of what our parents had done to me seemed to trigger his own awakening about the toxic dynamics of our family. He had voluntarily testified against them, providing details about conversations he had overheard over the years that he hadn't understood at the time. More importantly, he had started his own therapy to address the guilt he felt about unknowingly benefiting from their treatment of me. I keep thinking about all those times you looked sad at family gatherings, he had told me during one of our difficult but healing conversations. I thought you were just antisocial. I never realized you were mourning parts of yourself you couldn't even remember losing. The relationship between Marcus and me was slowly rebuilding, based now on truth instead of the lies that had shaped our entire childhood dynamic. It would take time, but for the first time in our lives we were relating to each other as equals, rather than as the golden child and the disappointment. The phone call from the Pentagon had come 3 weeks ago. The Department of Defense was planning a special ceremony to recognize veterans whose service had been improperly obscured or denied. I would be receiving not just my original decorations in a public ceremony, but additional recognition for the unique circumstances of my case. The ceremony would be attended by senior military officials, members of Congress, and representatives from veteran advocacy organizations. But perhaps the most meaningful moment had come from an unexpected source. Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez had tracked me down through veteran networks after news of my case spread through military circles. She was one of the soldiers I had saved during that devastating attack 15 years ago, the one that had earned me the Bronze Star. "Colonel Williams," she had said when she called, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been looking for you for 15 years. I wanted to thank you for saving my life, but also to tell you something important. The medics who served after you in that sector, they all knew your story. You were a legend. Your techniques, your courage under fire, the way you never gave up on anyone, it inspired an entire generation of combat medics. Your impact didn't end when you came home. It multiplied." That conversation had done more for my healing than months of therapy. To learn that my service had ripple effects, that other medics had been inspired by my example to save even more lives, made me understand that some legacies are too powerful to be erased, even by the people who try hardest to bury them. I had also reconnected with Dr. James Walsh, my commanding officer from Afghanistan. He had been promoted to general, and was now overseeing medical operations for the entire army. When he learned what had happened to me, his reaction had been swift and decisive. "Colonel Williams," he had said during our video call, "I want you to know that your service record has been distributed to every medical training facility in the armed forces. The techniques you developed for treating combat injuries under fire are now part of the standard curriculum. Hundreds of medics have been trained using protocols you created. Your parents may have stolen your memories, but they couldn't steal your contribution to military medicine." The teaching position at Milwaukee High School had become untenable once the media attention intensified. Not because of any scandal, quite the opposite. Students, parents, and fellow teachers had been incredibly supportive when they learned about my military service. But the constant interviews, the legal proceedings, and the process of recovering my memories made it impossible to give my students the attention they deserved. Instead, I had accepted a position with the Department of Veterans Affairs, working specifically with veterans whose service records had been compromised, or who were struggling to access their benefits. It was work that felt like a natural extension of my military service, still helping people, still fighting for those who needed an advocate, but now armed with legal authority and institutional support. The apartment in Milwaukee had been replaced by a house in Virginia, close to the Pentagon and the various agencies I worked with regularly. It was a modest place, but it was mine in a way that went beyond ownership. Every room reflected choices I had made based on who I actually was, not who I had been convinced I should be. Military memorabilia sat alongside books on trauma recovery. Photographs of my unit in Afghanistan shared space with images from the various ceremonies and recognitions I had received in recent months. General Hayes had become not just a mentor but a genuine friend. He had introduced me to a network of retired military officers who met regularly for informal gatherings, sharing stories and supporting each other through the challenges of civilian life. For the first time in my adult life, I was part of a community that understood my experiences without explanation or apology. The relationship with my parents remained severed, and I had made peace with that reality. Some bridges, once burned completely, cannot be rebuilt. Their letters from jail, delivered through their lawyers, were attempts at reconciliation that focused more on their suffering than on acknowledgement of the harm they had caused. I had read them once and then filed them away. Forgiveness, I had learned, didn't require reconciliation. I could release my anger without welcoming them back into my life. The most unexpected development had been romantic. Captain David Chen, a psychiatrist who specialized in military trauma, had been part of the medical team reviewing my case for the Pentagon ceremony. Our initial professional interactions had gradually evolved into something deeper. He understood the unique challenges of rebuilding an identity that had been deliberately fractured, and his own military experience meant he could appreciate both my service and my recovery, without seeing either as a burden. "You know what I admire most about you?" he had said during one of our early dates. "It's not just that you survived what your parents did to you. It's that you used that survival to help other people. You turned your pain into purpose." The ceremony at the Pentagon had been everything I had never dared to dream it could be. Standing on the steps of the building that represented everything I had served to protect, wearing my dress uniform with the decorations I had earned through blood and courage, surrounded by fellow veterans and current service members who understood the sacrifice those ribbons represented. The Secretary of Defense had presented me not just with the decorations I should have received years earlier, but with a special recognition for my work helping other veterans recover their stolen benefits. The audience had included some of the soldiers I had saved, medics who had been trained using techniques I had developed, and advocates who were working to prevent other families from perpetrating similar fraud. But the moment that meant the most had been when Staff Sergeant Gonzalez, now a sergeant major, had saluted me in front of the entire assembly. "Colonel Williams," she had said, her voice carrying across the courtyard, "on behalf of every soldier whose life you saved, every medic you inspired, and every veteran you've helped since coming home, thank you for your service. Thank you for never giving up, even when you didn't remember why that mattered." The standing ovation had lasted nearly 10 minutes. Now, sitting in Dr. Martinez's office 6 months after that night at the Symphony Hall, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed. The frightened, diminished woman who had stood in that concert lobby, accepting mistreatment as her due, was gone. In her place was someone I was still getting to know, but who felt authentically, powerfully, undeniably real. "Colonel," Dr. Martinez said, "I think our regular sessions can move to monthly check-ins. You've integrated your memories, you're managing your PTSD effectively, and you've built a support system that can sustain you going forward. More importantly, you've reclaimed not just your identity, but your sense of agency. You're not just surviving anymore. You're thriving." I stood up, shaking her hand with genuine gratitude. "Dr. Martinez, thank you for helping me find my way back to myself." "Colonel Williams," she smiled, "you were never lost. You were just temporarily misdirected. The strength, the courage, the compassion that made you a hero in Afghanistan, those qualities were always there, waiting for the right moment to emerge." As I walked out of her office and into the Virginia sunshine, I thought about that frightened woman at the Symphony Hall 6 months ago. She had been convinced she was ordinary, convinced she deserved whatever scraps of respect others threw her way. She had no idea that she was about to reclaim not just a seat at a concert, but her entire identity. The journey from that moment to this one had been difficult, sometimes painful, but ultimately transformative. I had learned that some thefts are so profound, they reshape your entire understanding of reality. But I had also learned that the truth, once revealed, has a power that no amount of deception can permanently suppress. My phone buzzed with a text message from Captain Chen, asking if I wanted to meet for dinner to celebrate the successful conclusion of my therapy. I smiled, thinking about how different this felt from the isolation I had accepted as normal for so many years. I had built a life filled with people who valued me for who I actually was, who celebrated my strengths instead of trying to diminish them. Colonel Sarah Williams was no longer missing in action. She was home, she was whole, and she was exactly where she belonged. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.